the depths and kind of put him on track again. Now, the Soviet Union is not a communist dictatorship, but it is not a democracy. Okay. So they have needed a strong leader to keep them on track. And my understanding is that he has rationed with less cooler heads from the Soviet era who are all too ready and willing to take on the United States in a war to get rid of us once and for all. And he has leaned toward trying to work with us, and most especially trying to work with the United States to push back the New World Order. Okay, so I mean, he's made comments. He's known about the pedophilia for a long time. I mean, he even cut off the ability of Americans to adopt children from Russia because he didn't want them coming over here for that very reason. Okay.
That's right. And that's a very important point to make, because in terms of global affairs currently, I mean, that cannot be ignored. The fact that, you know, there is pedo trafficking, child trafficking, and horrific Satanism and Satanist rituals involved where children are being grabbed. I mean, American children and children from other countries who end up here as well. This is happening in America. So, and it is great that Putin stood up and spoke out against that, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, exactly. And contrary to many people who think that Russia is still anti-Christian and atheist, he actually has stood up for Christianity. And he's told, he's told Muslim immigrants, he said, if you want to come here, that's fine, but you will become Russian. You will assimilate. There is none of this, carving out a piece of Russia for you and expecting us to cater to you, because you need us. We don't need you. So he's been very tough on immigrants. And he said, if you don't have that attitude, you're not welcome here. And how can you say that he's not right? Because any sovereign nation has the right to say who comes and lives there and who assimilates. Are you bringing skills that we need, or are you bringing mouths to feed that we don't need?
Mm-hmm. Well, the whole issue of immigration has become such a loaded one currently because there've been, as many of us know, there've been a lot of secretly funded immigration moves into Europe, for instance, those huge boatloads of immigrants from Northern Africa and elsewhere going into Europe and from the Middle East. Then there's also been wars creating real refugees. There's been drug busts and drug wars and drug gangs and whatnot. I'm sure the CIA was mixed up in it somewhere in South America, Central America, bringing immigrants to our borders over here. So in the past, whatever held true for, the flow of people across the world appears to have been exacerbated and accelerated in very politicized ways currently. So it's, kind of a real kind of strange, chaotic situation we are facing all over the world in regards to immigration. So that's another issue as well. To return to this issue of, Russia being named as interfering in the Trump elections, and Russia being named as the people who handed over emails to WikiLeaks. It seems like Russia all of a sudden is being brought in, and both President Trump and Julian Assange appear to be witch hunted in identical ways over here.
Exactly. And I have to say I have my doubts as to whether Russia acquired what was exposed. Because some of the political scientists have said, look, when Hillary was running for president, when she seemed to start gaining, WikiLeaks would release some of the emails. And people would say, oh, well, now, wait a minute, maybe I don't support her because things looked really dicey with what she was doing. And they were. The Clinton Foundation is probably one of the biggest scams the world has ever seen. And that'll come out, even if people aren't aware of that, it'll come out more and more. But it seemed like the Clintons were the ones who were really hot and heavy after Assange for releasing these things that they were not lies. They were exposing Hillary as, really the traitor that she is. If you look at it, Russia would be very interested. They would look at this election and say, okay, we see Hillary Clinton as a known New World Order puppet. Absolutely. New World Order. And Russia's against that, for a very good reason. And we're looking at the Republicans. Who are they going to nominate? Look, they've got Donald Trump. Well, we've had business dealings with Donald Trump. He's not an unreasonable guy. He's not a hawk that's going to scream bloody murder, attack the Russians, blah, blah, blah. So we're probably more interested in seeing him actually win than her, because then we would have an ally against the creep of the New World Order, and with her, then again, I'm going to point out, because I've said this before, if Hillary had won, then she would be turning over the might of the United States to the New World Order, which would create a lethal danger to Russia and many other countries, to include China. And I've brought up the fact that Americans don't think globally, but if Russia and China saw that she became president and that she would have her finger on the nuclear button, they might be tempted to do something preemptively. And I can't say I blame them. So what they might do is send over an airplane, let's say disguise it as a commercial jetliner, have it fly about a mile above the United States and send off a nuclear bomb. That would be an EMP, electromagnetic pulse. It would send us into the dark ages. And if they were patient, the vast majority of the population would die in the first year, because we don't know how to grow food. And be killing each other for cans of tuna left in the grocery stores. So if they waited a year, they'd have very little population in this country. And they would just come over, they'd send over people to populate it. Probably Russia and China would say, we'll split this, you take the West, we'll take the East. Or they could have done something like tactical nukes, preemptive tactical nukes to the population centers of the United States, and also to, the missile silos and things like that. Again, take us out before we could be a threat, and there would be minimal population left. They'd come over, maybe intermingle with the population, and still take over the United States, because China, especially, needs a place for all its people. It needs somewhere to grow food. It needs somewhere to raise cattle, raise pigs and chickens and things like that, because they live in one of the most polluted countries in the entire world. And they have the least amount of potable water per capita of anybody in the world. And the United States and Canada have the most amount of potable water and some of the absolute best farmland and grazing land in the world. And so that would be desirous to both countries to have control of that, and certainly have, they would have taken out the New World Order ability to conquer them.
Mm-hmm. That's a really interesting laying out of what might happen. And you point to something very, very essential. Hillary Clinton does appear to be connected to the CFR, to the globalists, to the deep state. And in fact, one of the most important emails, I think, that came out of that cache that Julian Assange released, that were, he says, given to him, but he stated in this particular interview with John Pilger on RT that I recently rewatched, he states openly, no, these emails did not come from Russia. But, he wasn't revealing sources, and that is part of a journalist's prerogative to protect sources. So, but he did say unequivocally these emails did not come from Russia. And one of the emails he pointed to was talked about the fact that ISIL or ISIS, I think they were calling it ISIL back then, right, during Obama's reign, ISIL was being funded by Qatar and by Saudi Arabia. Now, as we know, those countries are supported by the US. So this talks about weird geopolitical connections and creations and strategizing that actually involve the creation of terrorism, the creation of terrorists. That's huge, right? Obviously, that's huge. And that points a finger directly at the CIA, directly at the deep state, directly at the globalists and the New World Order. So perhaps, as you point out, people like Putin in Russia and the Chinese premier, seeing this scene unraveling over time, have also begun to understand very clearly some of the undercurrents here in terms of how terrorism is playing out on the world stage, and how they need to step in